tell me what you would tell or show me in your community if I were to come to your community. Not hearing anybody say anything. Nothing out there that you want to showcase or tout?
Beans and Steams has great coffee. So, and they're
Hey,
right by the interstate. So,
nice.
We have, so in Scottsbluff Gearing area, TCD does like a 2 hour community tour, because it's hard to pick one thing, but we do like a 2 hour community tour where it just take you to like our zoo and pathway and airport and all sorts of different fun stuff like that. So that's kind of hard, but we have a cool 2 hour tour that we could take anybody on if you're ever in the area.
Right. So I think when I posed this question a couple months ago, again, last minute, because that's sometimes how I roll, we heard about Scotts Bluff National Monument, and in Central City, we were invited to go see the Bison Dome, the first of its kind in Nebraska. It's a tornado shelter, and it serves as a high school gymnasium, and that's kind of underselling it. It's a fantastic facility. But so Josh says a kayak trip down the canal, and in the cooler months, the classic car collection, and I believe those are in Kearney.
cool.
So yeah, I saw some people kayaking just recently down the canal near Kearney. So that would be fun. As people continue to join us, welcome, and let me know if I were to come to your community, what would you show or tell me? It is passport season. I have friends who do the passport program every summer and post their pictures, and it looks like a lot of fun. So what could I see in your community?
Well, if you want to come to Clark's, hopefully in the next couple weeks, we will be starting the build of our first rural workforce housing.
Cool.
Awesome.
We did demo the first house. So we'll hopefully be ready to start house 2, maybe in the spring.
We love looking at progress. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, keep us
Awesome.
posted on that.
I
And we
have been
do
there.
have a new business that's also opening up next week that is showcasing local small businesses.
Nice, nice. That would be fun. And it's amazing how many small businesses you have in an area that you don't think about.
Well, my hometown yesterday would have been a tourist attraction because they got 7.5 inches of rain,
Oh,
and the
geez.
river actually had water in it, and they called it a 1,000-year flood. And we have a dry river. So I guess yesterday my brother said people were flocking out right by his property to see all the water running in the river. So there would have been our tourist attraction the one day for the year. So
Okay. I think that is of interest to David. As you were out walking flood reclamation project earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah. We
The
will
rattlesnake
wait
march.
yes. We will give one more minute and then we will get started. 'Tis summertime. I know I'm a little slower joining. Taylor says Lake McConaughey, second chapter brewing, mansion on the hill, Boot Hill, Front Street, petrified wood gallery, and more. Just prepare to spend a long week. There's lots to do, long weekend, lots to do in Ogallala. So definitely Taylor will take you up on that sometime. So
I've been there, and that brewery has really good beer.
okay. Yeah, sounds like an invite, Taylor. Maybe have David stop by and treat him to a tour of all of those amenities. So, okay. Well, I know people will continue to join us, so let's go ahead and get started because I know David has a lot of great information to share. So, welcome to the June 2024 HomeNE webinar. Thanks for joining us today. This is HomeNE, and it's a statewide learning network. South Central Economic Development serves as the lead agent for HomeNE, and it's designed for people from all across Nebraska, and many times we're joined by people from outside of our borders, so that is wonderful as well. HomeNE is an established network dedicated to bringing local leaders and people passionate about housing all together. We recognize the immense housing challenges in rural communities, and by providing face-to-face as well as online interactive opportunities, HomeNE helps to foster interaction, engagement, and skill building to help individuals successfully address their local housing challenges. And today, we are joined by David Scott, who is the city manager for the city of Sydney. During our practice session, I learned a new thing. You go on rattlesnake marches with David periodically. And so nothing I care to do anytime soon, but he had been out on one. And so check out that opportunity with him in the near future if you want to be visiting Sydney someday soon. So he was wonderful to work with during our practice session. And I am truly looking forward to what he is going to share with us today. So welcome, David. Thanks for being with us. And before you begin, please tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not into rattlesnakes. We did a drainage project that we have to walk every few years just to make sure the grass is growing and things are going right. But last year we were walking it and we did have a really close call. So now we just call that usual. It's an inspection, but now we've nicknamed it the Rattlesnake March because of the close call we had a year ago. But anyway, my name is David Scott. I am the city manager for here in city of Sydney. I am originally, I grew up lived my whole life in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's where I'm from. That's my hometown. And before I came to Sydney, I was the finance director in a very, very rural area in Alaska called Bristol Bay Borough. It's borough is the same as a county here. And so I was the finance director for Bristol Bay Borough there, helped them manage their salmon fortune, which believe me, there's a lot of money in that, boy. It's a big industry. But anyway, and then I finally, after about 6.5 years of that, worked my way back to Nebraska and happy to be here. It's an experience living in Alaska, in rural Alaska, is an experience I'll never forget. I'm glad I did it. But it is nice to be back in, I joke because people don't understand, but back in the land of actually painted parking stalls and things like that. It's interesting because when you don't have those kind of things, you don't know how much you appreciate them until you do, right? I've been in Sydney here for a little over 7 years now. I was first hired in early 2017 as the finance director. I was the first finance director they had. Before that, they had a clerk treasurer and a deputy clerk that managed most of the finances of the city. But when they knew that Bass Pro was going to be coming in and buying out Cabela's, they wanted to shift that more to a full clerk and then a finance director to manage the finances. And that's what they did. And that's when they hired me. I did that job for 3 years. And then the city manager was retiring. And at that time, he had an assistant city manager, and she was supposed to take over when he retired. But about a week before he left, she had a medical emergency and had to leave her position. And so they made me interim. And I was interim city manager for about, I don't know, a few months. But that was when the pandemic blew up and nobody was applying anywhere. Everybody was staying put. People just weren't traveling and moving to other locations to work like they do now, looking for other jobs outside of their borders. And so after a while, they did finally get some good candidates, but they'd already asked me to apply, and I did. And so a job that I really didn't intend to have or really want, I just wanted to fill in until they got somebody. Then I found myself kind of fighting for it. So it was really interesting way to get here. But I've been city manager now for 4 years, and I love it, and I love Sydney, and the opportunities are endless. So
super. Thanks, David, for that sharing. Tell us a little bit before you launch into your presentation today. You mentioned Bass Pro, but there was a time when Sydney was robust and growing and then kind of crashed temporarily and now rebuilding. Tell us that story and then go ahead and launch into your presentation.
Yes, and I guess I did touch on that. So when I got here, there were still all the employees were still here, but very shortly after I had only been here a couple of weeks, they started the attempted, and I always call it attempted relocation of all the Sydney employees to to Missouri, where their main Bass Pro's main office buildings are. It was quite scary. About every week or so, you'd get another 50 or 100 people would be set free. And we didn't know how that was going to affect us. I mean, we knew it was going to be negative. We knew it was going to be a long haul back. And it was, but not nearly as long as what we thought, actually. We went to work right away when I got here. They also hired a new economic development director. Her name was Melissa Norgard. We worked a lot together to try to come up with ways to get businesses into city, and we recruited very heavily. And we did creative things with our LB 840 that other people weren't doing at the time, with performance-based type incentives that allowed us to use a little bit of our future money to grab employers, when we most needed them. That's honestly a model being used by a lot of people now. We went out and contacted just about everybody we could think of. But the bright side was, I think what really saved us, and not to demean everybody's efforts, all the city staff and the chamber and everybody worked very hard to get businesses in here. But honestly, I think the main thing that helped us was the citizens' love for their city. They didn't want to go to Springfield. They wanted to stay in Sydney, right? They didn't want to go work for Bass Pro. They wanted to stay in the city that they grew up in and loved, and their kids were going to school in. And so many of them did stay. And the entrepreneurial spirit here is amazing. And a lot of people started their own businesses. We have several. I don't want to call them spinoffs for Cabela's because that's not really the right term. But we have Hy-Vee Outdoors, we have Next Gen Outfitter, we have Worldwide Trophy Adventures, so many of those types of businesses. And then we also got a lot of white collar businesses too, like UST Global, Nelnet, GL Hewitt, which is now called Hewitt. And those businesses came to us because, well, for obvious reasons, we had the trained people and nobody else did. You know how the workforce is right now, where everybody's looking for employees, and we had them. And so people were willing to come here, and businesses were willing to come here and set up shop. So it was just the love for the community and the desire to see it bounce back and be stronger and even more diversified than ever before that I think gave us the advantage and put us in. It was just 5 years from when I landed here, and it was nothing but doom and gloom. And I think even one newspaper article in an Omaha paper somewhere had printed "Last person out, turn the lights off," and that really fired us up. We kind of made that our call to action, that last person out, turn the lights off. And that became something that we used a lot in our meetings and conversations about how we were going to move forward and what we were going to do and what incentives we were going to put in place. And it worked. And who would have thought, it's been 7 years now, but I mean, we've needed houses for the last 2. So who would have thought in 5 years, just 5 years, we would go from doom and gloom to, oh my gosh, we need the same thing everybody else in America needs. We need people, we need places for them to live, and we need a daycares for them to drop their kids off on while they go to work, because we have more jobs than we can fill. So interesting that we went from, in a housing sense, from 220 plus houses on the market in what we would call the exodus to now there's almost hardly anything on the market, and we're desperate for more housing. So it's been a wild ride, and I credit the wonderful people of this community for their efforts.
Well, I know a lot of rural Nebraska was cheering for Sydney when you were going through that, and it's refreshing to hear.
Ooh, Tammy,
Bounce back is not the right thing, but
they're moving it to July 6th.
So yeah, just a reminder to mute your microphones if you would, please. So, but David, go ahead and share your presentation with us.
Sure. Now, I'm not a housing expert, but we did have challenges here in Sydney, as I said, and I think everywhere in rural Nebraska, it's challenging to get developers to come to your area and to want to build houses. I mean, we discovered here in Sydney, and I think in many of the other panhandle municipalities, the developers can build houses all day long, in the Front Range and in Lincoln, Omaha for $500,000 and $600,000. Why on earth would they want, to come here? And that was the challenge we faced, and we weren't alone in that. And so I wanted to just, this first slide, I just wanted to, and we'll probably revisit this later. I can't remember how my PowerPoint goes. I think it does revisit this later, but I wanted to point out that thinking regionally is, I think, what really has helped us in the last couple of years. And I'll go over all the other steps that we had to get to before we could even join these kind of conversations. But it was important for us to reach out to other communities that were having the same issues we were. And it came to light in a work session one time in a WNED meeting, Western Nebraska Economic Development, that's the name of that organization. And we were all sitting around talking about housing and how we were going to solve this problem because everybody was experiencing the same thing. And what we decided we were going to do is we were going to go to Lincoln to the NIFA Housing Expo where all the developers are and just try to grab one, right? So what we did was we created a whole bunch of logo and backdrops, table coverings, and made it look real professional, like we were, and we went there. But before we did so, we kind of gathered everybody together, Gary, Scottsbluff, Kimball, Sydney, and I'm going to leave out a ton of them. Bridgeport, Bear, everybody was in the room. And we decided, well, we need 20 houses, we need 50, we need 100, we need 300, but no developer wants to come there for a small number of houses. So we created everybody submitted what their need was and what their housing studies and things like that had showed, and what incentives they had and where they needed to build. And we combined it into one big marketing brochure so that we could pitch to somebody in Lincoln that we need 1,000 homes in the region. If you come here, we can keep you busy for years. And that was kind of our pitch when we went to the Housing Expo, and it turned out very good. It wasn't exactly what we thought. We thought we were going there to get a developer that was going to be a one-stop shop and kind of go to all the cities in the region, but it didn't really turn out that way. Interesting enough, we had everybody seemed like they got a little something, Gary wound up getting somebody that wanted to come there and build houses. Scottsbluff got somebody that wanted to come there, and we got somebody that wanted to come to Sydney. But it was interesting. It really was not the reason we went there, but it turned out every bit as good. And I guess my whole point here for other municipalities out there, if you're struggling, you are not alone. I guarantee you that. Your neighbor cities and municipalities are going through the exact same thing you are. And so if you can find an already existing organization like we had with WNED, or if you need to create one, or whatever you need to do to bring everybody to the table, it has paid off very good for us. And so for everybody in the region. And so I encourage everybody to do that. I think that would be a good first step, to talk to your neighbors and find out what it is they've done and how you can pull those resources together. And I guess we'll go to the next slide. The necessary actions. Well, first of all, I mean, it's important, I think, that you need to have a housing study. Every developer is going to want to see the need, right? They're not going to come and just build houses unless somebody shows them a document or a study that has been done somewhere that says, yes, you need these houses, and they will sell if we come there and build them. So a housing study seems like a no-brainer, but it's not sometimes, and sometimes they're costly. A housing study is not a cheap endeavor. And so again, I know Sydney, we had already started ours in 2021, but I know that some of the other municipalities in the area, like the Gary and Scottsbluff, Kimball, and some of the others, they pulled their resources together and did a regional housing study. And so that's an option as well. It was just, I would have joined in on that, but we'd already started out on one of our own, but that's a big plus. Another thing you can do regionally as well, just to help share costs. We did update ours in 2021, as I said, and as part of that process, you want to include as many people as you can. We had staff member, council members, people from real estate, people from banking. We tried to get just about everybody we possibly could involved. Of course, you got to do your public input, which we did, and we learned a lesson on that. And I guess I'll say we had 70 responses, and most of them were homeowners. We didn't get a lot from renters and stuff, so that made it a little bit more difficult for us to put our study together. What we learned, I guess, after another conference or another effort that we had going on for something in the city we were wanting to do, that a good way to do this is if you have a popular event, like an expo or something like that you do in your city, a spring expo, a farmer's market, anything, set up a booth there. You will do so much better at something like that than you will trying to send something out on your website or your Facebook page. People just click right past that. But when they're standing right there in front of you, it's hard for them to walk past it. So that's just a lesson to be learned. And I thought I'd throw it out there. We did do also listening sessions where we invited all those different like renters, landlords, and everybody else to the table to kind of see what their input would be, what they thought they would need, what their struggles were. So those were some of the first things we did with our housing study. I think if you go to the next slide, there might be a little bit more on this. I'm trying to remember. I put this thing together. By the way, I put this PowerPoint together a year ago when I spoke at a municipal league conference. And I think I've got it updated, but if it runs into something that's old, I'll make sure I point it out that I didn't update that slide. But and here's what some of the things your housing studies will show you is like your percentages of what you need in certain ranges of housing, how that analysis of affordability comes into play. Now, again, this slide is going to be, the wording is probably new, but the little inserts are from our housing study from 2021. So they're not going to be up to date, but it does give you a good idea of what areas and what price ranges you need for housing and how your growth is going. And then next slide, please. I don't remember. Yeah, and it does go a little bit further into it. Oh, do we go backwards? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, the final results, our housing study final results showed that we needed 208 houses in the next 10 years. So that's information we could now use in trying to recruit developers to come to the area, because we have this study now that says that, and it gives you the prices. Of course, now they're saying, I did not update that, prices under 200,000. We know that's almost impossible anymore. I think the floor now for rural workforce housing is even over 3, I believe, last time I heard, and I'm sure Jordan, who's on here, can probably confirm that, but it's something like that. But yeah, these are just some of the data that you will get from a housing study that will help you to kind of show what kind of things you think you need, whether you need apartments, single family housing, townhomes, which in most cases you need a little bit of everything, right? Most cities. So if you want to go to the next thing, I think, and I'm probably going through this a little quick, but so if you have questions, please just let me know. A blight study is also something that's very important. And the city did ours. We had not done a full citywide blight study since 1997. What the council and the planning commission and other agencies had been doing over the years is just saying, well, we're going to build in this area, so we'll designate it blight. We'll just add it to our current blight, right? And they kind of pieced and patched it together for many years. So what we had did is we decided to do a full citywide blight study. And again, in that we included everybody. Especially your people that have been around for a long time and understand zoning, like your planning commissions. They're really great at this kind of thing. We included them, and we included realtors and homeowners. And this is a picture of what we came up with for our blight study. And you can only have a certain percentage of your city blighted, and we're well under that, but it's important to kind of try to discover the next thing. Like, where do you think you might build? Where do you think you might need this? And you want to really get everybody's input, because there's things that I thought I knew the city like the back of my hand. And there were things that planning commission members that had been on that commission for 10, 15 years said, well, what about this little area? And I thought that's a great idea, so it's important to do a blight study. For one, it opens you up to be able to use a tax incentive financing, TIF, and other types of things in those areas when you go to develop them. So that's another step. What I'm really doing here, I guess, in this part of the slide presentation, is just going through kind of the steps that if you are nowhere right now and you are wanting houses and don't know what to do or even where to start, a housing study and a blight study are probably the first 2 things you should be thinking about, or at least it was for us anyway. So, and also, we just did our master comprehensive plan too. Most cities, I think, do those about every 10 years. I don't know if it's mandated, but but we do one every 10 years. And time we'd done it was 2012. And of course, that was when Cabela's was booming and things were going well. So we definitely needed to revisit that and revisit where we thought we would grow and where we thought we wouldn't grow. Land use is very important in a master comp plan. And the important thing to remember is that, again, you want to have everybody involved, everybody in the room, the community, and anybody you can in a master comp plan. It was interesting for us, and I didn't mention it earlier when I was talking about Bass Pro buying out Cabela's and you know, as I said, attempting to take a lot of people out of town. They did take a lot of people out of town, but they did not get all of them. What I didn't mention is they had started a couple developments, one specifically supported by Cabela's when they were here and going strong in 15 and 16. And then another one that was by a private developer, and well, another two areas that were done by private developers. And it's very interesting because you can see we have areas in our town, and if you ever come here, you would see them, I suppose, if you go in the right areas where there's all this infrastructure in place: roads, water, sewer, stormwater, fire hydrants, sidewalks, but there's only like 4 or 5 houses. And you can see that's exactly when Cabela's got bought out. And it's very strange to look at. We are now developing one of those areas, but I'll get into that later. But a master comp plan will help you to decide where those areas should be. So if we can go to the next, I don't know how much. This was our timeline for our master plan, which we did a long time ago. And so, well, not a long time ago, but I just wanted to point it out. This is a lengthy process. It took us 2 fiscal years to complete it. And it's not something you do overnight. Let's see, I don't even remember what all I put on here. Planning Commission. Oh, I already talked about most of this. We did hold joint sessions. That's correct, between the Planning Commission and the City Council to get them talking together. That was a great idea. It turned out very well. And why is it important for affordable housing? Well, it's important because you need to know where you're going to put your affordable housing or how you're going to do it and what type of densities you want. There are all kinds of densities of housing, you know, medium density, high density. You need to figure out how close you want them together, how far apart you want them together. Land use is important. I mentioned a lot of this, and downtown is becoming a big thing. I'm glad that I put that little bullet point on there. I think especially this is something that's very new, and it is kind of coming to light since I did this original presentation a year ago. A lot of downtown buildings in Sydney, and I think in a lot of other small towns, have your retail on the first floor, and then they have some apartments up above. And a lot of times, as we have, even in our city code, the apartments have to be up above. They cannot be on the first floor. But what we're running into now is on our main street, which for a lot of communities is Highway 30 or some other form of a highway that came to your town before the interstate was there. A lot of those old hotels that are all but abandoned, you know, they're still operating, but barely, right? Because most people are stopping at the hotels up by the interstate. We're getting a lot of people coming to us wanting to revamp those and make them into housing, like really affordable housing, like very small units, you know, maybe a couple rooms put together and then put in a little kitchen in there. And that's interesting because it comes with its own set of challenges, because most downtowns are not zoned for residential. And if you have residential on first floor, now you're asking your planning commission and your council to spot zone and put residential right in the middle of where everything else is retail and commercial. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting thing that we're just now starting to kind of encounter. So at the end of this, if somebody has more insight to that than I do, I would sure appreciate your advice, because we are just starting to see that. And if somebody else has already seen that and been through that, yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to hear how you went about it. But so I was glad I put that on there, even though it meant something different when I did it. And we also updated our LB 840 for any city that has an LB 840 plan. In 2019, the Nebraska legislature allowed people that had an LB 840 plan to add things like early childhood development and housing, along with a few other things. But those were the two main standouts, because as I said before, you know, you need people to fill the jobs, but you also need a place for them to live and a place for them to drop their child off when, you know, when they go to work. And so it was a godsend, I think, that the legislature started allowing cities with LB 840 plans to use that for housing and early childhood development, which we did. We didn't do it right away, but I think it was somewhere in here, it says the date, but around 2020, I think we actually added that to our LB 840 plan so that we could start using it for housing. And we did recently too. And I'll get into that later when we get into later slides, but there are all kinds of ways you can incentivize housing. And this is just one other tool that you can use. Any municipality that has an LB 840 plan that hasn't updated it to include housing and early childhood development, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take a look at that, because for one, you do not need to take your LB 840 plan back to the voters to do it. It's just an action of your advisory committee and your council. That's all you have to do, because the state has already made it an allowable use of those funds. So that's the beautiful thing about it. You do not have to go back to the voters to add it. So, and then the next slide says Rural Workforce Housing Fund. Another thing we did here, and I think a lot of communities did, is we applied for rural workforce housing through that state's rural workforce housing program. There are a few things to mention here. Well, I guess what I have in my slide, I'll just try to go by it. I'm terrible at going by slides, by the way. I just like to talk about it. We received $1 million from that with a $500,000 match. Our match was from a number of sources. Mostly we got it from a couple granting agencies, and then a little bit of also local support. We did apply. It's important to mention that you have to apply through a economic development corporation. Municipality alone cannot apply for this money. We were fortunate in that 2 years ago when we did this, Panhandle Area Development District was able to submit that application on our behalf for us, and we were very grateful that they did. And then let's see to do that application though, I'm sure, and I'm thinking you could probably give a whole presentation for an hour on filling out these applications and getting them submitted. They require a whole bunch of things. They require you have a plan. They require you have your budgeted match, and you have to have select your board members. You have to have a board for it. And there are certain things that I believe they require, like at least one real estate agent, one banker. I can't remember exactly what the other requirements are. I know that we have at least those two things on ours. And then again, as I said, we applied through the development district. That was the only way we could do that. And oh, sweet, we're getting to the end here. So what we're doing now, I guess, as a recap, the city did implement all those things that I had mentioned, and we did go to the Housing Expo, and we did have somebody that was interested, and yet we were still struggling, right, to making a house affordable for a single family unit is very, very difficult in today's environment. Worked with regional partners. That was one of the most important things we did. The Rural Workforce Housing Fund is a godsend as well. It allows you, it is not meant to be take place of a bank, but work alongside of a bank to help add some funding at very low interest. So it's basically interest-free if they pay it off right after they sell the home. And then another thing we did that I think is interesting, I don't know that many other communities have done. When we were talking to our most recent developer, where they are actually building a few houses, they were very close on the sale of the land, but they were about $5,000 apart. And I thought, God, we're going to lose this whole thing for $5,000. So I took a resolution to our city council to waive or to do a moratorium, whatever you want to call, on the cost recovery, or hookup fees is better known as, like your water, your electric, your hookup fees in areas where we already had infrastructure. As I mentioned, when Bass Pro bought Cabela's, they left so many areas where we actually had the infrastructure in place, but it's probably between $5,000 or $6,000 to hook into the water. So we waived all those for a 2-year period, and that got us to where we needed to be for them to decided to buy those lots. It was very helpful for us to do that. Just one little thing that sometimes people don't think about, but in some areas, those are very expensive, hookup fees. And if you can get around that somehow, that's a big bonus for somebody wanting to buy a piece of land. And then I don't know what else I have left really, other than questions, but thank you. I mean, I tried to go as quickly as I could, so I would leave time for questions, so many things that I'm sure I left out, but um, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And sometimes thinking outside the box is not a bad thing. I'm really interested in some of the things other communities are doing now too. I see so much inventive thinking with like tiny homes or even cargo container developments and just things like that. It's interesting to see what other communities are doing. This is just some of the things we've done, but I know everybody is doing all kinds of inventive things to get developers to rural Nebraska.
Thank you, David. So, yeah, what questions are coming to the top of your mind for David? As a city that was kind of on the edge of make it or break it when Cabela's was bought out and, can I say, hostily taken over by Bass Pro. No hard feelings there, but
it is what it is.
yeah. What questions do you have for David this afternoon?
Nothing is off the table.
I don't have a question, but I'm just saying, like, David talked a lot about regionalism and WNED and working together. And I just want to say, Dave has been awesome just with the whole like working together approach. A lot of, he talked a lot about WNED and the going to the expo and all that stuff. A lot of that stuff has actually come from Dave. Like those were kind of like his ideas and those kinds of things, like the marketing and going to the conference and all those things. So Dave has played a huge role in that, which has landed a lot of housing in Western Nebraska. So huge kudos to Dave for that. And then also, he talked about rural workforce housing, and someone else on here talked about their first rural workforce housing. We've done 18 rehab houses in Scottsbluff, Gearing,
Awesome.
Bayard, Mitchell, and Kimball, and 12 new construction in just the last year and a half from our rural workforce housing. Over $3.3 million just in money that we've given out, not total money. And we actually, a huge win that we just had happen from this is we have a construction company picked up and moved out of Colorado to Scottsbluff Gearing because of our rural workforce housing program. And they're currently working on 2 rehabs and about to do 13 townhouse units. So just huge kudos to Dave. And regionalism, and like Dave said, talking to your neighbor works really well because they're going through the exact same thing that you're going through. So it does work.
Wow, you're too kind. Thank you.
Yeah,
But
you're welcome. I
again,
expect you to do the same for me though, Dave, on another call. So
I
So,
will.
yeah, stepping outside your comfort zone. I mean, that was kind of a novel approach, David. Just
Yeah.
packing up materials and such and going across state to NIFA. So, yeah, that's
Well, if you
that's a
can't get the
really
developers to
interesting.
come to you, you got to find a way to go to them, right? But and that's
Yeah.
I guess was kind of our thinking on that. But um, I do think that the regional approach is going to be very important for people that are in smaller communities. And the one problem I think what holds people back sometimes, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but a lot of people think I want to keep this to myself. Like if I hear that maybe there might be a developer interested, I want that here. I don't want to tell my neighbors about it, because they might steal them from me. Or there's a lot of that kind of. I think we've experienced a little bit of that here in the beginning when we first started talking. Like people would share, but maybe not share everything because they don't want somebody to come in and take their developer away that might have a better incentive package than what they have. But we put all that aside and said, no, we're just like, I will share everything I have with you. And it doesn't matter. We're all going to win one way or the other. And so that's, I guess, if there was an obstacle to reaching out and working regionally, that's probably one that I think people will experience. And it's very hard to set that aside, but to be truly successful, that's what you have to do.
yeah, I
So
agree,
how
Dave.
far
I think
apart?
that's the biggest obstacle is trying, you want them to come to Sydney and we want them to come to Gearing and Scottsbluff and those kinds of things. But if you can get past that, it really does work out. Like Dave said, we went as a group and we each landed a project. Sydney has a project, Gearing has a project, Scottsbluff has a project. So we all landed something and it worked out really well.
So share the logistics for those of us not familiar with the Panhandle. How far apart? What what's the region distance
Oh,
wise?
well, the Panhandle, I suppose we're about travel time, maybe an hour and 15 minutes from Scottsbluff and Gary, but you could keep going north to like, your alliances. And I suppose that'd be what, maybe 2 hours or something like that from the south part of the Panhandle,
Yeah.
2, 3 hours at
Okay.
most.
But we don't
So-
think anything about going from Holdridge to Lincoln and Omaha. So it's a very
Right.
doable distance regionally. So, yeah. So,
And
well,
our,
what questions do you
WNED
have?
group has about like 12 members. So they're like community members like Kimball and Gearing, Scottsbluff, those kinds of. So we have 12 members communities in WNED, but I mean, we work with the entire Panhandle. So like all 11 counties of the Panhandle, we welcome collaboration with every single one of them.
Yep.
Perfect. So, does anybody have questions for David? And Jordan, you've jumped in here too. Maybe
Sorry,
we
Dave.
can do some tag.
Oh,
No,
good.
you're
No,
good.
you do what you need
We
to
can
I
do
love
some
it.
tag teaming if there's a question about the regional aspect. Well, I'm not hearing anything. I know David posed a question to all of us, and if you do have any response to give to David about downtown residential spot
Yeah,
zoning,
we'd love to
those
hear that.
types of topics, he would love to hear it. We've put his contact information on the screen for you, so feel free to reach out to him. So before we conclude, I'm just going to remind you of a couple things. And then let you know what our next webinar is. We did do our spring gathering just 2 weeks ago today. We went to Custer County and participated in a full day of interaction and teaching and instruction. We saw development going on in Ansley and Broken Bow and Callaway, and heard from community leaders about what they're doing to tackle their housing challenges and bring solutions to their community. So it was a great day. We greatly appreciate it. And I don't know if any of our hosts were with us today, but if they are, I just want to say thank you to all of them. So 35 individuals made the trek to Custer County, and we loved having all of them. So if you're interested in knowing more about our day in Custer County, feel free to reach out to us and we'll let you know what you maybe missed out on. So and also just a reminder that today's webinar, as well as all past webinars, can be found on our HomeNE.us website. We've got a partial listing of past presenters on there for familiarity, and we just encourage you to check that out. It is searchable. So once David's presentation is on there, you can search by his name, by the topic title, as well as several different other things that he mentioned today. So feel free to check that out. So, and our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, July 18th, always the third Thursday of the month. And McCook Economic Development Corporation is going to be joining us. Amanda, are you still with us? If you are, I'd like you maybe to give us a sneak peek about what you and Charlie are going to be sharing with us next month.
Yeah, we thought we would kind of share with, I mean, being a small community, we kind of had to start thinking outside of the box at kind of what the scope of our projects was going to be. Similar to kind of what David was talking about with their regional approach and going to NIFA, how they were going to bring developers to a small rural community and how to make that enticing for them. So we've been kind of taking a little bit of a different approach and maybe some greater risks to bring in more housing development to McCook.
Sounds very interesting. Look forward to having you guys speak next month. So thank you, Amanda. So anyway, as we conclude, last call for any last thoughts or comments. Well, hearing none, thank you, David, again for giving your time and telling us a little bit about everything that's going on in Sydney. Sydney on the rebound and progressing would be an accurate statement, I think. Would you agree?
Yes, and thank you for allowing me to be here.
Yeah, anytime. So come back and maybe catch us up on new developments in the future. if you
I
would.
have
So
to say, I have to add, this has been wonderful. I love the fact that you start with the housing study, the blight study, you bring all that background in, the land use, the importance of that, the regional aspect, so many things all of us need to hear because we want to work in our own bubble, and it's uncomfortable to get out of that that comfort zone, get out of our office, make some trips somewhere. But the other thing I want to mention is that I went to I attended the Connecting Entrepreneurial Communities conference in Sydney, got to experience the downtown, got to make some purchases. I didn't get to stay for
Great.
both days, but it was really, really fun. And if you get the chance to go out to Sydney for a visit, it's worth the trip.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, that was a great conference, by the way.
Yeah, but it was fun to see your local businesses and to walk in and just, man, you have a furniture store that's second to none. You have a, remind me the name, Savory something, all the
Savor and Grace. It's a
Yeah.
charcuterie place that actually does salads and all kinds of, it's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I even went into the hardware store and bought my favorite steak seasoning. I think it's Jack Daniel's, and they had a better selection than most places that I go. And so it was really great. So it's really fun to get to visit the places that we showcase on here too. If you get the chance, if you're headed somewhere and you can pull off and stop, do it. It's worth it, even if you just have an hour. That's kind of what this is about, right? Is just connecting all of us in Nebraska.
Thank you very much.
definitely.
Well, and
Yes.
David, you said something earlier about wanting to know if anybody's doing upper story. If you go to the HomeNE website and search it and just type in upper, you will find Hastings and several other communities that are doing some upper story that maybe you could reach out. So
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Appreciate that.
yeah. Randy Chick in Hastings is probably the king of second story development. They've condoed by floor in various things. So it's got some good stuff there.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, anyway, to conclude, I just wish all of you the very best on this first day of summer. And thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. And